Let's do this thing. Cool. The 178 subs. Gotta love that. There we go. Hey there, chat, comma. Drop me a message when you join in. We'll give everyone a few, and then we'll get started. Hey, awesome, Chris. Glad you could make it. Appreciate you being here, taking the time out of your day to show up. I know you'd emailed me. Really appreciate you taking the time to even let me know whether you'll make it or not. So fantastic. How you doing today? Doing really well, thanks, Chris. Just relaxing, you know. It's been a nice week. Got the family coming into town next weekend as well for my birthday, so looking forward to that. Updating programs. My athlete Brandon had his first strongman competition ever yesterday. Won the thing, and he was competing in the open class. So that'll be something I'm going to talk about here. I want to wait until maybe we get another couple minutes. Because then today what I want to talk about is I'm going to talk about Brandon's competition, the events. We're also going to discuss what a week of training looked like for him. I'm going to talk about the next couple programs I got going on. So should be pretty fun live stream. We'll just kind of see how many of us decide to party today. And thank you. Yeah, I mean, I am just insanely proud of him, To go into your first strongman show, compete in the open category, and win, especially with 7 athletes, And he lives in California, nearby Untamed Strength and all that, so it's not like this was a show where you could just walk through it. He was the only one in his field. It was competitive. It was really, really very spicy. I'll actually have a debrief with him later today. Oh yeah, seriously. I always joke that I'm kind of like Red Skull because I guide others to a treasure I cannot possess, but I don't have the unfortunate political affiliations of Red Skull. Alrighty, well, let's go ahead and dive in here. If you have any questions along the way, I will be looking at the chat. But let's talk about Brandon's Strongman debut. So the show was out in California. I think it was at Misfits Gym was the name of it, Misfit Muscle, something like that. So the events were as follows. There was a log and sandbag pressing medley. I think the log was 220 and the sandbag was 200. So you had to go back and forth on the two. Next event was a max frame deadlift. Then after that, we had the chain yoke, which was roughly 537 pounds, if memory serves me right. Hercules hold, which, calculating the weight on a Hercules hold that's someone way smarter than me is going to have to figure that one out. And then a stone series. So as far as how the events went, Brandon took third place in the log and sandbag medley. And of all the events we were training for, I'd say this was my second biggest question mark event. What I mean by that is that was the event that gave me the second most concern in coaching him, just because sandbag press is such a unique event, very complicated to train for if you don't actually have enough sandbags, which we didn't have sandbags for the majority of our prep. So it was one of those things where we just focused in on the log, and even the log, we did most of his log training on an 8-inch log, and then every couple weeks he would drive over to Untamed Strength. Shout out to Untamed Strength, Alan Thrall and the crew over there. They are some of the OGs in the YouTube fitness world, just all around. It's one of those places I'd love to set foot in someday. And he would go down there, use their 12-inch log for some of his work as well. Frame deadlift, he tied for first place, and I really have to dab him up here. First week of prep, just kind of doing a dry run on the frame deadlift, he topped out at around 560, and at the show, he wound up getting 850 and nearly got 890. So we really piled some weight onto that frame deadlift. Big part of that was just developing skill and getting used to pulling from that specific height as opposed to pulling from the floor. So it's one of those things where, it's a multifactorial thing. You can't just expect to add, almost 300 pounds, God, that's weird to say out loud, in a 16-week training block over and over, especially if it's a movement you're already skilled at. But because it was a novel variation, I think that's a big part of the reason we saw those kind of gains. But even then, I am going to say it, beginner gains, this and that, it's 300 friggin' pounds on a single lift in 16 weeks. So even if someone, squatted an empty bar their first session, and then at the end of the prep cycle was squatting 345, we got to dab them up, right? So big hats off on that with the max frame deadlifts. That was just really cool to see. All right, then after that, he had a chain yoke event. So it's like the yoke, but worse because it's chains. And for this, we did not really have access to a yoke. He used it a couple times down at Untamed, but for the most part, we actually trained this with loaded marches, which I'll talk about later. Hercules hold, which that's just mainly a grip event, upper back event, so train those. And then last but not least, stones. I believe there were 4 stones in total. He got 3 of them in 41 seconds. Third place, I think, got them in 47 seconds. First place got all 4 stones. Also worth mentioning the Hercules hold, I think his best time, he won it by over 13 seconds. He had a big overperformance on the Hercules hold, which also ostensibly might have fatigued him a little bit going into the stones. Chain yoke took first place by a decent margin there as well. So on the events that he did not win, he was really close and in the mix. When you're when you at your first show, when your single worst performance is third place on the pressing event, that sets you up to be in a very good position because he won 3/5 of the events, right? And that's kind of the big rule with Strongman is you don't have to be a specialist at anything, but you really can't be bad at anything. So hats off to Brandon in that regard. And, he was very successful in this prep cycle because he asked questions. He made sure to keep me informed on how things are going, just being very active through all the prep with communication, which is what we need. We would occasionally change it out to 3-day weeks if we had to. Things like that, just embracing the jank. Looks like there's another person who just joined. Whoever you are, please say hello. I'd appreciate it. But otherwise, I will not press the matter. And thank you again for showing up, third friend. But let's go over what a sample week of training might have looked like for Brandon. And I actually did pull this out of his prep cycle. I'm not going to give you the sets and rep schemes, but you can probably infer it just based off of, if you've read my programs, you kind of see how I tend to do things. So day 1 was a lower max effort day, and this would usually be a heavy squat. We also did some narrow sumo work at one point. Reason for the narrow sumo work is that had a lot of transference to the Atlas stone pick. It was also going to help strengthen the hips and adductors, which would be very beneficial for the yoke carry, for that moving event. That way he's not losing position. And then additionally, it let him get, on some weeks, 2 touches on the deadlift without generating too much fatigue, whereas if you're doing a frame deadlift plus a heavy conventional deadlift in the same week, probably going to beat you up. Brandon's a pretty reactive lifter too. His squats aren't very grindy, so putting in heavy squats in his prep was not going to be detrimental. And towards the end of the prep cycle too, he'd work up to sets of 6 to 8, for example, because again, I just wanted to build upper back leg strength and hip strength to have transference over to his chain yoke. Then after his squat or whatever max effort movement we had for the day, we do some glute ham raises, some good mornings. Really depended on how his low back was feeling, overall fatigue, this and that. Nothing too crazy there. After that would be single leg work. We made a heavy use of Zercher variations in his prep cycle for the single leg work, as well as for the loaded march thereafter. Reason being, I'm a big fan of the Zercher. And one of the benefits of it, when done correctly, is you're really going to load your midline, and you're loading it with a slightly rounded upper back, as well as helping learn how to engage your serratus. So for something like the yoke, having the serratus be active helps you maintain better alignment as opposed to being overarched underneath the yoke, where your hips are behind your shoulders, and now you're putting a ton of pressure in your lumbar spine. So by using a Zercher lunge, for example, we train him to have everything stacked in his position under the yoke, so he's going to move better with it. Then after that, we do something like a Dimmel deadlift or even just heavy kettlebell swings, strengthening the glutes, strengthening the adductors, because we wanted a hip and pelvic stability going into the yoke. That was really an event that I was very concerned about. That was actually my number one question mark event, was the yoke, because we didn't really have consistent access to it. Then we would do either some sort of loaded barbell march with the bar on his back marching in place, or a Zercher march. Either one just depended on where we were in the training cycles. Building that unilateral leg balance, building the core and midline. Nothing too fancy or too complicated there. And then towards the end of the prep cycle, we added in barbell suitcase holds. So that's just where you hold a bar right in the middle, stand there and stand upright with it. It's kind of like a standing side plank. Also incredible for the grip. Ed Cohen used to do these. And that was to help train him for the Hercules hold to work his grip, right? Pretty simple operation there. Now, if we move to the next day, the upper max effort day here, we would usually do something like a 50-degree incline press. I've talked about it before. 40 to 70 degree, 40 to 60 degree incline press is one of my favorite pressing angles for the strongman athlete because it has so much transference to the log, because the log does have a substantial degree of layback in the press. And it's the same thing with the sandbag. You have to have layback so the implement can clear your head. Additionally, when you have that layback, you're able to better keep your elbows underneath your wrists as a result of that, so then your triceps stay active. Whereas if you try to push your head through and go vertical torso prematurely, your elbows will actually kink out, and that reduces the ability of your triceps to help you press the weight overhead, so it makes for a less efficient pull. It's kind of the same reason you can usually do more weight with a skull crusher than you can with a front raise, right? And then usually between sets of the max effort press of the day, we did some rear delt work. This could be YTWs, rear delt swings, face pulls, just kind of whatever we felt like popping in there. We would do pull-ups after that, superset those with dips. Now the pull-ups were there for a few different reasons. One, he just likes pull-ups. Two, it's a good all-around upper back movement. And what I wanted to do was have vertical pull to help decompress the low back after the heavy lower body work of the day before. Usually we'd have it done on the same day, but if you look at his lower max effort session, it was a pretty dense session. There was a lot going into each workout, setup and breakdown. To me, it was just a more survivable means and method by moving it over to the upper max effort day. Pull-up, superset with dips. We did a lot of ring dips during this prep. He really liked them. He just said, hey, these feel amazing. And from a coaching perspective, I'm a very big fan of the ring dip. Great for chest and shoulder stability. It's going to work that serratus like we've talked about. That way he can get that good protraction of the scapula for future training waves, as well as keeping his shoulders healthy, and again, keeping everything stacked underneath the yoke. And then it was usually some delt isolation, lateral raises, face pulls, whatever. Oh wait, no, wrong day. No, then after dips, then we would go into a horizontal pull, a chest supported row here, so we kind of double up on the back work on upper max effort days. Again, everyone's a little different. Usually I like to do my back work on my lower days. For him, this just seemed to be a better path forward. With that chest supported row, we often did a lot of rest pause work, some sort of intensification method just to get the workout done with faster, and then wrapped up with some sort of tricep isolation. Could be the rolling overhead tricep extension, could be standing dumbbell overhead triceps, could be the French press. Whatever really worked, it doesn't matter that much. The difference between pressing 200 on the log and 250 on the log, the difference there is not going to come from whether you're doing tricep press downs or skull crushers, just realistically speaking. Then usually you have a day off, do some cardiovascular conditioning work, lower developmental effort day. What we did here is he would warm up with a deadlift stance pause squat or box squat. Then we moved right into the frame deadlift. And for his frame deadlift program, I ran a pretty basic, not quite linear progression, but block progression. We did heavy triples for a while, and then some speed work after. We did heavy doubles for a while, some speed work after. And then usually that was just followed up with a bent over barbell row. And we would do these with a wider grip on occasion to help build the upper back, because that would help with the pick of the stone, right? And then, as we moved on in the prep and had access to the sandbag later, we did some work with the sandbag, complexes, EMOM work, nothing too fancy, just trying to get the triple extension hip hinge work in. Not much to say. Some shrugs and abs, nothing too complicated. Now for the upper developmental day, we would do usually a log complex. So it might be something like 2 cleans to a paused push press to a regular push press. Any sort of skill development work just to get him used to having the log on him, as well as practicing all the different positions. And then as we moved through the prep cycle, we started adding in fatigue singles toward the end, because by this point he had built a lot of competence with the log. So now what we needed was confidence. So we allowed him to work up after his sets. That way he could build the floor of his strength and also kind of see what his technique would do under fatigue, right? Because you always fall to the level of your preparation when it comes to competition. So we wanted him readily prepared, and clearly it paid off. Then after that, we would do usually some explosive pull-ups. And he actually wound up getting a muscle-up, fun fact, during this prep cycle, which was really cool to read from him. It wasn't even an intentional goal, but hey, muscle-ups are awesome. So if you can do one, more power to you, right? Then after that, some sort of pressing movement, usually a 50-degree dumbbell bench, some face pulls, maybe a little more triceps and abs. But that was just a regular week of his training. So you can see here, it's pretty true to how a lot of my programming looks. We just tweaked a little bit to be more individual to him. Max effort variations were always just there to be subservient to improving the main thing. Oh, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I appreciate that. With any sort of program, obviously, as they get closer to the competition, you have to make changes that it's more direct to the competition and more closely emulates the positions and loads they're going to be handling in the competition, right? It's kind of the similar thing with power lifters. A lot of them will train with an SSB or a high bar squat in the off season, and then as they near competition, you'll start seeing more and more of them use the low bar squat. Or if they compete with knee wraps, they don't use knee wraps year round usually, or they might only do a couple singles with knee wraps and then do most of the work sleeved. And then as prep cycles continue on, you're going to see the gear get used more and more and more. We don't just periodize the way we program. We also want to periodize equipment use. We want to periodize technique even, because there's something to be said for understanding all these secondary factors. I think that's one area where a lot of strongman athletes go awry. You got guys using those insane triple ply red Cerberus elbow sleeves, right? They'll use those year round. And I think for a lot of them, that actually is holding them back because they're not getting those developmental waves without the triple ply sleeves. But hey, that's just my objectively correct opinion. So that's kind of a good overview of what went on with Brandon. I'm going to give the chat a couple moments to catch up if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'll move on and I'll talk a bit more about the next couple programs I'm dropping here. Just give me an all clear when you were ready to move on, chat. All right, cool. Let's keep rolling then. So next up, I'm going to talk a little bit about the next programs that I'm dropping. West Side for Chubby Bastards 2 and Conjugate Kaiju. And then with these, so I'm sharing the split, right? So West Side for Chubby Bastards 2 is the sequel to its original predecessor. Nothing too much to talk about there. Main thing with West Side for Chubby Bastards 2 is I'm getting rid of the circuits. Just listening to most people's reviews of it, the feedback I received, people did not like the circuits. I think that's one of those mistakes that I made in writing the program initially was I was thinking about myself because the program was kind of written for a past iteration of me, and I do train in a semi-private studio, so I don't have to worry about people being on the gear. So in Westside for Chubby Bastards 2, we're going to get rid of the circuits. You can still do them if you wanted. I'll probably have inlay that you can run it if you like. And then aside from that, it is going to be a Conjugate program because, you know, I'm the CEO of Conjugate, right? And the split's going to be your standard 3-day split. Lower max effort day, you're going to have a max effort deadlift, a row, a vertical pull, single leg, and then either a leg press or sled, and then some ab work. Pretty basic operation there. On the upper max effort day, you're going to have a main press, a supplemental press, and then the third press is going to be DB or machines. Actually, DB or dips. Because we're gonna be having a larger calisthenic element in Westside for Chubby Bastards 2. Reason being, I like calisthenics for the strength athlete in general, even if you are a strongman athlete, because it's a ready proxy of how body comp is going and your strength to weight ratio, right? If you're losing weight and you get worse at calisthenics, that means something is going terribly wrong and we need to reevaluate. Whereas if you lose weight and continue to get better at calisthenics, in the sense of you can actually add more weight and you're doing more gross weight with your calisthenics, we're winning. And what I mean by that is with gross weight, is let's say you weigh 200 pounds and your best chin up, you can do a 100-pound chin up. That means gross weight, you are pulling 300 pounds to the bar, right? Now let's say you drop down to 190 pounds and your best pull-up is 110. What that means is your gross weight is still 300 pounds, so that's all right. Whereas let's say you drop to 190 and your pull-up strength, you can do a pull-up with 130 now. Well, now your gross pull-up strength is up to 320. So we know that there's a lot going on, a lot of positive adaptations going on behind the scenes. Whereas if you drop down to 190 and your best pull-up is 90, well, now, you know, gross weight is only 280. So you saw a pretty substantial strength dip in your vertical pull, which is what we don't want to see in a fat loss phase. We want to make sure to retain the strength. So that's why we're going to have a dip progression baked in there. So yeah, you'll have a main press, a supplemental press, and then some dip work. Delt isolation of choice, a couple tricep movements. And then the third day, we're going to have a squat wave, and we're actually using a density wave where you do however many reps in a certain amount of time. Never thought about it. Yeah, so, you know, it's one of those things, Chris, as far as tracking gross weight, that is really what you should be doing with your calisthenics. And the reason why is I'm actually going to type this out really quick. So let's say 300 pounds, right? Because you're 200 plus 100. The problem here with most people, the way they do their loaded calisthenics is if I want to do, let's say, 80%, you'd think, okay, well, I can do a pull-up with 100 pounds hanging on me, so 200 and then plus 80 equals 280. That's not 80%. What that is, well, that's a little north of 90%. So as a result, you'd wind up overloading your weighted calisthenics if you don't factor in your body weight. So instead what you'd want to do, right, is if we're thinking about doing 80% of our hypothetical 300-pound one rep max, we would want the weight to be 240 in this case, right? So then it's just 240 minus body weight of 200 means you would just be doing it with 40 pounds hanging off of you to make it 80% for your weighted calisthenics. Yeah, so that's how that's going to work there with loaded calisthenics. I actually, in my ebook, Conjugate Calisthenics, I have this laid out, and we're actually going to be using elements from that in Westside for Chubby Bastards 2. I'd actually written Conjugate Calisthenics as kind of part of Westside for Chubby Bastards 2, and then I realized, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and release this on its own because it's probably a useful tool in general for people to have. So then, our third day, we're going to have a density work for our squat, and then the log, we're actually going to be using a complex progression here. So what I mean by complex progression is, for example, in one of the weeks, you might do something like 2 log front squats, 2 log viper presses, and then 2 log push presses. Reason being, because you're losing fat, your leverages are going to change. We need you to get good at taking multiple different positions and adapting your position and technique to the changing body shape. So using a complex progression will help you improve all facets of the log. That way your skill element remains high while you continue to work in your strength element with the log and the rest of the workout. Then after that, we'll do some single leg work, some chins, a row of choice, and bicepticon work. Nothing overly complicated here. I mean, if you've seen Westside for Chubby Bastards 1, this program is going to be very similar. It's a little more strongman specific because I do have a log complex progression in there. I am going to have a remix of it available in the book where it's like, you know, if you're not doing strongman and you just need a program, run it the way that I suggest. Because again, I know that not everyone who follows me is here for strongman. I have a lot of kind of power building general trainees, which is awesome too. Strongman really is just general training taken to the absolute extreme with weird implements after all. All right, again, I am going to let the chat catch up. Just give me an all clear sign if you don't have any questions, and I'll move into talking about Conjugate Kaiju. All right, cool. Yeah, I think it's actually just you and me today, Chris. I always appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me. Conjugate Kaiju. This is probably one of my most anticipated programs. When I first mentioned it coming out on Instagram, I got a lot of response. And I think one of the funniest things I was hearing from everyone was they just said, "Oh man, I love the program name." I mean, it makes sense, right? Strongman, Kaiju, big, strong, scary. So this is a strongman off-season mass gaining program. Yeah, exactly. With a name like Conjugate Kaiju. Honestly, I'm going to say it. This one's going to wind up being a continuous series. In much the same way that Westside for Chubby Bastards got a sequel, Conjugate got a sequel, I definitely see Conjugate Kaiju being a continuous program. And truth be told, I could see it winding up as being my flagship program. So with Conjugate Kaiju, 4-day split, 2 max effort days, 2 developmental days. There's nothing too crazy about... Yeah, I think it's a good idea, too, to have it be a continuous program. I mean, people like it. Why not? And I like putting out content people actually want to see. So, split's pretty simple. 2 max effort, 2 dynamic effort days. There's not too much to talk about with the first 2 days. If you look at them, they're not too far removed from Westside for Chubby Bastards 2. And I think that's actually one of the mistakes a lot of people tend to make with their programming is whether you're bulking or cutting. Your program doesn't change that much. Main thing is you're just going to play with the intensity and overall volume. And then with Westside for Chubby Bastards 2, I do bring it down to 3 days a week of lifting just to better manage fatigue because in a calorie deficit, your ability to recover from stress is compromised. And at day's end, whether you want to admit it or not, training is a stress on the body. The main difference is going to be when we talk about our developmental days here. Now, originally when I was spitballing this split, I was going to have it be a full body day for day 3, and then day 4 was going to be an upper back and arms day. But no matter how many iterations I played with it, I just couldn't make the split work the way I wanted to. So I decided let's not reinvent the wheel, simplify it. Now, on an upper developmental day, you're going to have a Viper Press program. I very much want this run with the log 1 motion. You could try running it with, a muscle snatch if you wanted to, but it's a strongman specific mass gaining program. And one of the big things is when you are trying to move up a weight class, it's not a condition to get sloppy. You want to retain your conditioning. And the Log 1 motion is a strength and conditioning movement to the absolute nth degree. It helps you get bigger, stronger, and leaner. It's a great all-around exercise. So that's why we're going to have that kind of be the anchor point for day 3 of upper developmental day. Then after that, there's going to be a higher volume close grip bench progression. So on these movements here, we're actually not going to be doing any flat bench. Reason being, I don't like doing flat bench or too soon before the log because if your pecs get tight, it can impede your overhead position. At least that's how I'm going to program it. But with most of my programs, as always, there's variations you can pick and choose from. So if you wanted to do a heavy bench press on the first day, you certainly could. Might impact your Viper Press, might not. Your mileage may vary. Then after your 2 big presses, tricep bicep work, there's a lot of triceps in this program, as there should be if you're going to be moving up a weight class. because, well, triceps need a lot of work to get strong. And again, if you're moving up a weight class, in my experience, observationally, lighter lifters, as they move up, their deadlift comes along for the ride pretty nicely, but usually their press needs a bit more love to help it, I guess, remain competitive in the heavier class. And triceps are a big part of that, as is the upper back, which is why all throughout the week, upper back work is sprinkled through the program. Then our lower developmental day, you're going to have a squat program here, and it's going to be fairly high volume. Normally, I'm not really big on that, but remember, this is an off-season mass gaining program. So in this context, it's going to be a solid option, plus it'll help with your conditioning. Then after that, a hinge of some sort, most likely going to be like an RDL or a deadlift stance good morning, just a great building movement. A vertical pull to help stretch out your low back, some single leg work, and then either leg press or sled work, and some abs. Pretty basic setup all across the board. With any of these programs, the split's never that complicated. I like to keep things as simple as possible because the more complicated you make it, the more things tend to go wrong, the more things get lost in translation. Alrighty, well, that's all I really had to talk about today. Aside from that, my own training is going to look pretty much going to look kind of like Westside for Chubby Bastards 2, but I'm going to have a fourth day in there just for myself. I'm going to be focusing a lot more on static strength and whatnot. I kind of, talked about this in my last video. I want to start chasing down a 675 deadlift in 2025. So right now I'm in a base building phase. I don't really want to go too heavy this time of year. There's something to be said for a little mental burnout and also just enjoying the holidays, being with friends and family. Still going to enjoy my training, just not going to be doing any sort of 1-rep maxes or things like that. Looks good. Will you be using mechanical progressions? I probably will. Right now, Conjugate Kaiju, I have certain parts of it already written out. It's not done yet. Westside for Chubby Bastards 2 also uses mechanical progressions, yes. I'm really big on mechanical progressions as part of a conjugate sequence. I think it's one of the best ways to run it. One of the biggest problems with conjugate programming out there is people are just picking max effort variations out of a hat every week, and they're not thinking about long-term stressors. It's the same reason why I don't rotate max effort lifts every single week. You should really be staying with a variation for at least 3 to 5 weeks to extract the maximal benefit from it. And when using the mechanical progression in addition with that, I find it just works a lot better. I've had a lot more success for both myself and my athletes. There's a time and a place for getting a little zesty, but again, just personal observation. But let's see here. What was I saying? So my own training, it's going to be a 4-day Westside for Chubby Bastards. I want to start chasing down a 675 deadlift in the new year. Kind of thinking that I might want to go for a 1K push-pull total. I just think that'd be a really fun little side quest for myself. Build up my Turkish get-up, do some squatting. It's all it is for me right now. Don't really have any big competition goals. I've got some folks that I think they're going to start competing in March in Strongman, so I got to keep an eye on that, figure out how I'm going to program for them. But yeah, myself, no, I'm kind of, enjoying my era. Yeah, street lifting definitely is on my radar. I need to figure out when and where these competitions are for street lifting. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with street lifting, there's a few different versions of it. There's just I think it's called Classic, which is the weighted dip and the weighted chin-up, which is also, that it does influence my own programming as well as Westside for Chubby Bastards 2, which is sort of kind of for me. And then there's the all-4 version of street lifting, which is weighted muscle up, weighted dip, weighted chin-up, and back squat. I want to get into this sport specifically because I am not built for it. I'm built for the deadlift. I've got very long arms, very long femurs. Gives me wonderful leverage on the deadlift. However, those long femurs are a liability in the back squat, and the long arms are a liability on muscle-ups, pull-ups, and dips. But my thing is, we can either make excuses or we can make our own route to being successful. It's not like I'm looking to set the world on fire and be the greatest street lifter ever, but I think it would be a really fun challenge for me. And doing something like this, especially as I'm trying to lose weight, it feeds into those goals. I like using performance-oriented metrics rather than just the scale weight. That's part of the reason why, I talked about that a bit earlier, why I like having weighted calisthenics in a fat loss program. It's all proof of concept to me. It just makes perfect analytical sense. And I get to chase some fun goals. And, if you're good at calisthenics, you tend to look good. And, hey, I'm going to be 35 next week. I'd like to look good without my shirt on. I want to, feel good about myself. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. All goals are fairly noble in the world of training, whether you want to look incredible or lift more weight than the other guy, or ideally both. Right? Who doesn't want to be beautiful from the neck down? But yeah, street lifting's on my docket, It's just one of those things. It's kind of like high rocks. I want to do high rocks, but it is so expensive to travel and compete in high rocks because there's no competitions nearby. But, if I can grow the business, hint, hint, then I could definitely look into doing more stuff like that too. But regardless, I'm just sitting here. I'm coming up on 35. I'm just really thankful. I love that I get to do this. It's so fun getting to hang out here with my internet friends, all you cool people who live in my computer. Yesterday, my athlete Brandon winning his first Strongman showed. I literally met this guy through Instagram, and it was funny. He was at Giants Live, and he actually met up with another one of my athletes who was at Giants Live, so they took a picture together. It's really neat to see how social media, we all talk about how much we hate social media, how terrible it is, but it can do some really cool things. I've met some really cool people. I've had great experiences. That's how I found out about so many things and helped me get better at what I do and have helped others get better at what they do. So yeah, gratitude is really something on my mind. I'm very thankful to be here. Thankful for the position I'm in, When I was turning 34, I was living in a 400 square foot trailer. Things weren't great. Things were fine, but they weren't great. But now to be sitting here in this wonderful home that I closed on in April, it means the world to me. And, to everyone watching this, whether you're live or you come back later, thanks for being here. I really hope you get some value and I'm able to help you in some respect with your fitness goals or, even if I just make you laugh a little bit. And thanks, Chris. I really appreciate that, It's really cool having so many people from all over the world and country really be so positive. I get some trolls here and there. Who doesn't, right? But what do they matter? Especially because most of them are private accounts. Okay, chat. And that's really all I've got for you today. Like I said, I figured it'd be a quick one. If you got any questions for me, anything at all, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to say let's call it a day. And next time I see you folks, I will be a year older. Alrighty. Well, you folks have a wonderful rest of your Sunday. Friendly reminder, I am not going to be here next week. I'm out celebrating with the family. Now, I may or may not be able to drop one of my programs that upcoming weekend as a birthday present to you all. No promises, though. All right. Catch you next time.